last video for today then. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use the other video, which is the field test one, okay, and we're going to try and do a pull focus between the background and the foreground in our field test. So if we look at in our, I've got it saved in my downloads, where is it gone? There it is, field test. So here's the footage, okay, so as you can see it's all sharp. There's our character, and we're basically going to try and do a pull focus between these trees and this character, okay. So the first thing you're going to need to do, I won't do another video with this bit obviously, but the first thing you need to do is get this into After Effects, and just like we did before, stabilize it, because as you can see it is a little bit wobbly, okay, and you're also going to need to patch out this nadir, okay. So I've already done that, and I won't explain why, but for my field test stabilized is in a different format, just because I was trying a few things out. So you can just export yours just like we did in ProRes. So this is actually still in ProRes, but it's a ProRes MXF. Don't worry, it's just because it came out of Media Encoder like that, but it's the same thing. So what I'm going to do is pick up my stabilized field test, I'm going to drag it over here, so there it is, and now I'm going to move it down onto my composition, so there it is. And if you now look, we've now got, it should be nice and stable. So even though the wind is blowing, as you can see it was a windy day, we've still got a nice stable looking clip, okay. Now, I mean, for the purposes of this, I don't want this to take a long time because it's obviously a tutorial. So I'm going to be doing a few things quite roughly. You might want to take a bit more time on it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I've got 30 odd seconds here, and I don't want 30 seconds. I'm just going to do a 10-second pull focus. So I'm just going to move my tab from my work area to 10 seconds just to make sure that I'm not having to kind of do lots and lots of rendering. And then I'm going to use this tab just to zoom in so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. Okay, so here's our footage. Just like we did before, it's a bit grey. So what I might do is just be tempted, if I was going to be using this for real, first of all, before I start mucking about with it and creating multiple layers and things like that, I might just kind of grade it a bit to make it a little bit nicer. So, you know, just for the purposes of this, I'm just going to whack that saturation up a little bit, like so, just to make it sort of leap off the screen a little bit more. And I might add a colour correction, brightness and contrast as well, and just sort of pick up a little bit of that just to make it sort of bounce, and just a bit more contrast, just to sort of, you know, just to give it a bit of presence there. Yeah, but as I say, you can do what you like with it, can't you? So that's our footage then, okay? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create several layers, and the reason for this is we're going to need, because everything's sharp at the moment, we're going to need to separate our footage out into different layers so that we can then put different bits in and out of focus as and when we need them. So I'm going to come down to my clip, and I'm going to go to Command D 3 times, so to create 4 different clips. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and that's now giving me 4 different versions of this same clip. Okay, I'm going to right click on the bottom one and rename that as main. Then I'm going to click rename this one, so right click, and I'll call this trees. Right, click on that one, rename, and I'm going to call this focus 9. And right click on this one, and this one is going to be figure. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is I'm going to just turn off the eye for figure at the moment, and I'm going to turn off the eye for focus line. We're going to just start by separating out this background. Okay, so we're going to now, in fact, if I turn off main as well, just to begin with, we can see what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is on my tree line then, I'm going to take my pen tool, and I'm just going to do this roughly. Like I say, you could do this, spend a bit longer on it if you want to, but I wouldn't, you know, you don't have to do it like super meticulously, because that's not the way these things work. You know, it's more of a sort of general sense of the thing rather than the thing itself. So I'm just going to just very loosely kind of create a mask line along where these trees are. And don't worry about the way that it's going to cut the figure in half, because basically we're going to be adding another layer which is just for the figure, so it doesn't matter at the moment about the figure. So I'm just going to bring this along like so. Remember, hold down spacebar if you want to move the footage along. Don't just drag it because it won't work. So there we go. And now I'm going to just... what a mistake. What a mistake to make here. I'm going to drag that back, so I actually hit spacebar there and made it play rather than holding down spacebar. So I'm just going to zoom out now I'm going to build my mask around the top. So there's my tree line. At the moment, we can't see anything underneath. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my Effects and Presets tab here, and I'm going to open up the Immersive Video effect. Now the reason we need immersive video, not just normal ones, is that if we apply a normal blur effect to this footage, what's going to happen is that when we try and put it together in a spherical format, this line here is going to, the effect is going to basically sort of edge here and on this edge as well. When we stick it together, there'll be a very clear and definite line when we put the equirectangular into a sort of spherical format where these two ends meet. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to use the immersive video, and this is designed to be a kind of an infinity blur which doesn't change these edges, if you see what I mean. So we're going to grab our VR blur, drag that down onto trees, and what we're going to do is we're going to start off our footage with this, with these trees being nice and sharp. Okay. What we're now going to do then is I'm going to turn on back on main. Okay, and I'm going to drag my VR blur onto main as well. And if I open up main and then open up effects, there's my VR blur effect. And in blurriness here, I'm going to just whack that up to maybe, let's say 20. Okay, and at the very beginning of the clip, then I'm going to turn on my blurriness stopwatch so that I can adjust that later on if I need to. So at the moment, if I zoom in there, we can see already we've got a bit of a sort of, a slightly depth effect, haven't we, with this sharp background and this blurred foreground. Okay, that's a very hard line there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my trees layer, okay, and I'm going to open up my effects layer in here. So I've got hue and saturation, brightness and contrast in there, yada yada yada, and now I've got my VR blur in there, and I'm going to just turn on the blurriness stopwatch for that as well. But I'm also in my masks. Close effects, open up masks, and mask 1. I'm just going to feather the edge of this mask by maybe sort of 10, just to soften it up a bit. Perhaps I'm going to go to 14. There we go, just to give it a nice soft kind of look. Okay, and if I click away from that now, you can see that edge is just slightly softened. All right. So that's our footage so far, looking fine. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do then is we're going to add our focus line. Now the focus line is an interesting one. We have to do this quite crudely, and I'll try and explain exactly why as I'm doing it. So here's our focus line. So now because this one's now on, everything's now gone back sharp because we're looking at this whole footage. Okay, what we have to do with this one is we have to make sure that this footage is flat. The reason being that if we do it by hand, where the focus line, as you'll see in a minute, where the focus line meets, it'll be out of sequence because we won't be able to get it exactly right. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this rectangle tool here, okay, and coming out like that, I'm going to create a narrow band of focus here, which is going to look a bit like that, okay. And at the moment, that's I'm going to keep, basically the idea is that I'm going to keep this nice and sharp, and as I move it down, it's going to basically look as though that sharpness, that line, that focus line, is crawling forward towards our subject. At least hopefully that's the idea. I think I've probably made this a little bit high, so what I might do is just, potentially just drag those corners down, like so. Actually, no, I don't know. I think it's probably all right, actually. I think that's probably going to look okay. Because we need to be able to see it. So, yeah, that should be fine. All right. So, here's our thing then at the moment. There's our focus line. If we now turn off that and that, we should just be able to see that's our clip at the moment. Okay. And if we come back onto like so, we should now be able to see that that all looks fine. So, here's our tree line here, which is nice and sharp. Here's our focus line, which is nice and sharp. Here's our foreground, which is soft. Okay. Now then, what we're going to do is I'm going to open up the mask properties, and I'm going to open up the stopwatch on that mask path, a bit like we did before. Okay. And I'm going to go to, let's say, I don't know, about sort of like maybe 8-ish seconds, something like that. Okay. And at that stage then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have dragged my, I'm using my arrow keys actually, and I'm going to bring my line of focus down to the feet of my subject, because that's basically where, like, it's now going to suddenly make my subject spring into existence, into sharpness. Okay. What I'm also going to do is, again, I'm just going to feather the edges here. I'm not going to feather it much because it needs to be probably about 10. I'll do. Okay. Little tip: if you are trying to work in After Effects and you want to get rid of these lines so you can actually just see it quickly, if you hold down Shift, Command and H, then that allows you to see your footage. So if I zoom in on that, we can see that my edge feather is probably a little bit sharp still. So I'm just going to feather that out slightly more. So actually, yeah, it's probably gone up to about 30, I think, probably, just to really make it sort of look a bit more like a focus line. Okay, so there we go then. So what we've now got is a situation where I've now got two keyframes here, which is my oh no, of course yeah, no, sorry, that's my mask path, isn't it? I was going to say I haven't turned on the stopwatch for my feather. That's fine. So it's going to be 31 pixels feathered all the way through, but my mask path starts over here and finishes here. And that's the point at which I'm going to make my character sort of spring into existence. Okay, so if I zoom back out now, what we should be able to see is this crawling line of focus coming towards our character as we play our footage. Sorry about the sound, by the way. As I say, it was a windy day. So you should now be able to see, hopefully, if you look for it, there's this line of focus coming down like so. Okay, all well and good. So far, so good. Right, so now what we're going to do then is that doesn't look like very much at the moment because, of course, that's just one little band of sharpness, but all this background is sharp. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to Shift, Command and H so I can see those lines again. And I can see that as I get to about here, which is the point at which this is sort of leaving the background behind, about there-ish, yeah, I'm starting to sort of, about there. I now need my background to go out of focus. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my trees like so, and remember I need to have my blur effect, VR blur. Now I'd already turned on my stopwatch for VR blurriness, hadn't I? So as I come back to about here, which is where it's just starting to kind of leave the tree line, I'm now going to make another keyframe just by making an adjustment there and then taking that back to 0. So it's still at the moment I've got 0 blurriness on this background. But as I take it through now from that keyframe through to the point where it now, where the focus line is, if I go to where the focus line is, there we go. So we can now see that it's about there. Okay. If I now go back into my tree and start ramping up this blurriness to about sort of 20 odd, let's say, which is about the same as it was in the foreground, then what we can see is, as you see how what we're trying to do is make that go out of focus a little bit like it would if we were, if we were actually turning the focus wheel on a camera. Yeah. As I say, I'm doing this quite crudely, but you can spend a little bit more time refining that if you want to. Okay, so here's what we're looking at the moment then, is our creeping band of focus. So at the moment nothing else is sharp apart from that band of focus, but as it gets to the feet of our character, that's when we want our character to sort of spring into sharpness, if you like. Okay, so let me just play that through again just to make sure I'm happy with it as an idea. I'll play it through in real time. So we go to there, and then that's our, yeah, it might be a little bit, perhaps it needs to speed up. I can just drag that to there and that will speed up that transition a little bit. Okay, we shall see. Okay, so all well and good, but at the moment we still need to do something with our character, don't we? So what we're now going to do is we're going to close down our here, like so, and I'm now going to turn on figure. So now again, we've now got everything sharp again. What we're going to do is we're going to take our pen tool, we're going to zoom in on our figure, like so. Remember, hold down space to make sure you can see him. And I'm going to do this, you don't, I mean, I wouldn't go in, you know, loads and loads and loads and loads of key points for this mask, because it only needs to be, you know, quite sort of, you know, it doesn't, oh, shape layer. Why has it done that? I want a shape layer do I? Okay, figure. Pen tool. There we go. Right. So yeah, as I say, it doesn't need to have loads and loads of key points on this mask. On the contrary, it kind of just needs to be reasonably simple, although there needs to be enough key points that as he moves, we are seeing the mask sort of change to match his movement. So I'm going to basically come down like so, and I know that his jacket kind of does a bit of a movement a bit later on, so I might need to add some more in there, but I'll just come in here for now like so. So I don't think he moves a great deal. That'll do. There we go. Like so. That's it. So there's our character. Okay, and as you can see now, if I go Shift Command and H, you can see what the final effect is hopefully going to look like. Is he's going to like be nice and sharp, and everything else is going to be soft, a bit like he perhaps would if he was if we were doing a pull focus. Okay, so we're going to zoom in on him again. We can see that the edge of this mask is a little bit crude, but what we can do is open up our masks, and then in mask 1, just like we did before, we can feather the edge. Although I don't feather it a lot, so I'm just going to feather it by maybe sort of 10 pixels, something like that, perhaps. Okay, a bit like that. What we then need to do is we need to turn on the stopwatch for mask path and also mask expansion, just in case we need to change the shape of that mask at all at any point. Okay, now we might find that we perhaps need to bring it in a bit closer to his shoulders and stuff once we kind of tidied it up. But for now, I'll sort of okay. So now then, we're at this point now where the focus line is sort of reaching his feet at about sort of now, isn't it really? Like so. So I'm now going to add a VR blur to my figure, like that. Close that down, and in my effects, I'm going to turn on the VR blur, and I'm going to say, at this point then, here in the composition, just as this reaches him, okay, I'm going to want, let's say it like, at what point does it reach him? It's about there, isn't it really? About 8 seconds, okay? So I'm going to turn on my blurriness, and I'm going to say, right, I want you to be nice and sharp there, and then come back to about maybe here, which is where it's just about reaching him, maybe a little bit more, and now I'm going to take this blurriness down to about 20, just like we did about 20 for everything else. Okay, now you'll find that on this bit it's a bit sharper than on this bit, and it's actually gone a bit too much, so I might take my blurriness down to about sort of 10 or so, so it's not quite as blurry. Okay, so there's our character then, in nice and soft. Okay, and at the moment then, as you can see, the background is sharp, the foreground is soft, and so is our character. And then as we play it through, then our background our tree line should gradually go soft in a second as we get to that point in composition. There we go. And here's our line of focus coming down our character like so. Now at the moment, can you see how his hand is sharp? Because that's the hand that's actually being seen on the focus line layer and not on the figure layer. So what we'll need to do in a minute is just adjust the mask so that it matches, so that we're actually seeing the character from the figure layer, and not the focus line layer. Okay, so as we play it through then, gradually we get down to this point then where the focus line has almost reached his feet, and then now he is going to go sharp, like so. Okay, so again, we can't really see that in real time, but if we play that now through, we should be able to see that in real time, hopefully. Okay, so there's our pull focus moving, and there's our character then coming into focus. Okay. So what we're going to do now then is just come back to that point in the composition where we were seeing his hand. So that hand there is the hand that's on the focus line, you see what I mean? Whereas the rest of him is the figure. So now what we're going to do is go Shift Command H to get our bits back that we need to see. Okay, and then using this arrow tool, I'm now just going to drag these bits of the mask around so you can see his head's looking down. So I'm just going to move that round onto his head, like so. That's it. And like that. As I said before, I might need to add some more points on this mask. We should just have to see, but for now that seems to be reasonably okay. So that's like that. Okay, it's going a bit pixelated just because obviously I'm trying to do a screen recording at the same time. There we go. So there's his hand, so I need to just adjust that so it's still covering his hand, like that. Can you see what's happening is every time I make an adjustment, it's creating a new keyframe on my mask path, which is what we put a stopwatch on earlier. There we go. Make that like that. That should now come around his head like so. That can go like so. Yeah. Again, I'm just doing this quite crudely. You can take a bit more time on it if you wish. There we are. So get that in there like that. Get that in there like so. There we go. And that's now tucking in on his leg, so I'm just going to move that a little bit. That's it. And then gradually it's going to sort of come in. There's his jacket sort of billowing there a little bit. But again, I mean, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to bother too much with stuff like that. Okay. Now, the only bit that we might need to think about is whether his shadow would come into sharpness as well. But I think at the moment we're kind of getting it with the focus line, so it's kind of okay. But, you know, again, you might want to think about that depending on the position of the shadow. So now, as we play it through, we can now hopefully see that his mask now sort of matches him. So as the focus line creeps down, we're still seeing his hand out of focus because we're now seeing the hand on the figure layer and not on the focus line layer, if that makes sense. As I say, it's a little bit crude in the sense that when the background goes soft, there's like a sort of momentary gap between the focus line and the out of focus of the background, which you probably would want to tighten up if you were going to do this sort of for real. But basically, here's the principle behind it. So then, as we play it through, our background should go out of focus in a minute. There we go. So there's that little bit I was talking about, where the bottom of the trees are just a little bit sharp, bottom of the bushes, that sort of thing. But I shall try and explain why that's important in a second. So again, you might be able to sort of want to refine that. So here's our focus line, then coming down our footage, and as we get towards the 8 second mark, then the focus line is approaching his foot, and so he's now nice and soft. Yeah, da-da-da-da. But then as it comes in, we then see, bear with me, we now see just as it reaches his foot, we now see him spring into sharpness like so. And there's our footage. So we'll just see that in real time. Here we go. There's our full focus, coming down to his feet, and like so. Yeah. And the reason why we needed to do this as a the focus line actually as a line and not as a mask like we've done before is quite straightforward, really, because if we now look at it as a 360 composition, if we get to the point now where we can see our footage, can you see that in the 360 format? If I now turn this around, can you see how that, because it's a straight line, this focus line now matches up with itself on the other end of the footage, whereas if we hadn't done that, if we'd done it by hand, this might be up there and this side might be down there, and they'd be sort of dog-legged. You might not necessarily notice that, of course, and that might be a trade-off that you might want to say, well, actually everybody's going to be looking at our character, nobody's going to notice that, so what the hell. But I've just done that as a start just because I think it's a sort of more it's a cleaner way of doing it. Okay, so we only did about 10 seconds, didn't we? That's why that mask is kind of missing, and it's not really tight around our character, so you might want to go in there and fix that. Basically, here's what it looks like in 360 then. Here's our footage, and that's what it would look like to begin with, and then as we play it through, we are now going to our background goes soft. As I say, you really want to just fix that little bit there. Here's our creeping pull focus, going towards our character, and then as we get to the sort of 8-second mark, our character now pops into sharpness. So, I don't know what you think about this as an effect, really. I don't know whether it's sort of effective or not. Whether it would work in the way that we kind of want it to, or not really. I don't really know. I mean, I've sort of only tried it a little bit for now, so I haven't really kind of tried it in anger and a kind of a composition that I actually want to do anything properly with. When you see it in the headset, it is quite effective, but again, it's sort of up to you what you think or you might do with it and whether you feel it's particularly effective or not. Anyway, that's the technique. As I say, the other ones are sort of standard workflows, but this is a bit more of a James-ism. So I know it's a long one, so yeah, do sort of try and keep up with it and give it a go if you want to, and I look forward to seeing some of the results. Okay, cheers everybody, nice one.